Hey, it's Big T. Welcome to lesson 4 of how to tie flies. Hope you've been following along and been able to put a couple bugs together already with the first 3 lessons and what we've learned. Mom told me I was looked tired in my last video, so I'm going to try and pep it up today. She doesn't fly fish, has no idea how to tie a fly, and yet watches all my videos. Love you, Mom. Mom's the best. So what we're going to do today is we are going to take the waltz worm that we tied last week, and we're going to add 3 new fundamentals. One is adding and measuring a tail to the fly. The other is wrapping a ribbing along the body of the fly on our dubbing. That creates a segmentation. A lot of the bugs in the river have a segmented look, and that will mimic that. And then we're going to also add a soft hackle right behind the bead of the fly. This is a lot of stuff in one lesson, so you may want to pause and practice several times as you move through. That'd be a good opportunity. And you can tie the tail in and then just dub the fly, fish that fly. You know, make a couple of those. Dub the tail in, or tie the tail in, dub the fly, wrap the ribbing, fish a few of those. And then add a soft hackle later on and take your time progressing through this lesson. Let's talk real quickly about what we're using. We're going to use pheasant tail as our tailing material. This is a must-have material for every tire. You're going to tie pheasant tail nymphs, lots of other stuff with them. You can also use cockadia, and that's another real CDL. It's a really popular tailing material now. We're going to use the same dubbing we used last week, a hare's ear dubbing. We're going to use a copper wire for our ribbing. This is UTC small copper wire. And we are going to, that's probably the most popular ribbing material, but don't ignore using things like crystal flash. There are a lot of synthetic quill type ribbing materials that some have UV. Just kind of play around with that if you want to. And then for our soft hackle feather, we're going to use CDC, Col de Canard. That's a great feather for dry flies as well. I like it on my soft hackles because it has a tendency to have a lot of movement. Sometimes it traps air bubbles that mimic the nitrogen that's created by an emerging insect as it comes to the top underneath the wing case to help that come out and create the adult insect that flies away off the top of the surface. So that's what we're going to do. The other soft hackle feathers that are very popular, Hungarian partridge is a very popular feather, has a nice speckle to the fibers. And starling for a lot of the smaller bugs. I'll use India henbacks. You can actually just use a dry fly feather as well if you choose to. So I'm going to pause now and we're going to zoom in so you can see a little better what I'm doing as we progress and tie this fly. Okay, so this is what we're going to end up with after about the next 10 minutes of putting this together or so. Soft hackle waltz worm. And what I'm going to do today in the materials from the last session and what we've been using thus far has been your standard nymph hook, 2X nymph hook. And go ahead and use that if that's what you got on hand by all means. What I'm going to put in here today is a jig hook just so you can see the difference. The main difference in this hook is you notice we've got a bend downward on that part right before the eye of the hook. And so what that will do is that will transfer some of the weight to help that fly ride point up, which is going to keep you from getting hung in a lot of circumstances. Now, these generally are better fished with a slotted bead. So this bead's actually going to have, see if I can, probably not going to be able to show that to you on camera, but it's going to have a slot in it that will slide over. So you want to apply the bead with the small hole onto the hook point, and then your slot will slide over so that this sits correctly on your hook. All right, so I'm going to start with our 70 denier black thread. Again, I'm going to put it over top of the hook behind the bead with my bobbin opposite of my body. My hand, my non-dominant left hand, is going to be towards my body. I'm going to be beginning to wrap over top of the thread tag enough to secure it and then clip the excess off. I'm going to wrap that back to the bend of the hook, touching turn so we've got a nice thread body, and I'm going to get my pheasant tail. And I just want to use 3, maybe 4, 5 fibers of this pheasant tail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stroke some of these back, okay, and kind of get them out of the way, and I'm going to pick out the pieces that I want to use here. Now you can either cut those, or some people will just pull them off. I've pulled these off here. And by separating them, you're going to keep the ends, for the most part, at the same length. So I've done that, and these are the same length. Hopefully that's visible. I believe it will be. So we've got to figure out how long we're going to put this, or how to apply this so we have the correct length tail. And the way we're going to do this is we've got this pinched in our right hand. We're going to place it on top of the hook, measuring to see where we want that length, and then pinch with our left hand when we get that. Most of the time with a tail, I'd like that to be about 2/3 of the length of the hook shank. So I've done my pinch wrap that we learned in the first episode. I'm going to come over top with one more loose wrap, and I'm going to take it and eyeball it. To me, that's just a hair long, so I'm going to grab that with my left hand, pinch it, and just pull slightly to adjust the length of that tail. Once I've got that where I'd like it, I'm going to pinch again and come over with a couple more pinch wraps just to make sure I secure this down. And I'm going to progress that thread forward. And I want to kind of keep this material on the top. If it strays from the top of that hook, I'm just going to move it back where it's on top of the hook till I get to the top of the bead. Now when we start using multiple materials, in this case we're going to add dubbing and a ribbing, you go backwards. And what I mean by that is we're going to apply our dubbing first and then our ribbing. So when I'm tying my materials in, I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to tie my ribbing in first, and then I'll dub the fly. So let's talk about tying this wire in. The reason I want to tie it in up in front of the bead and not in the very back, even though that's where I'll be starting with my rotation of the wire, is especially with bulkier materials and ribbings, you can create too much bulk in the back of this fly. By tying it into the top of the fly behind the bead, I'm going to be consistent all the way through the body of the fly. Most of the flies are tapered a little bit, or most bugs are tapered a little bit front to back, so you do not want a lot of bulk in the back of the fly. I'm going to place this where it's right behind the bead, and I'm going to come over top. Now if you notice, my thread jumped backwards, okay, which is great because that makes it real easy to come down and secure that. A lot of times your thread may want to jump the opposite way, in front of the bead. If that is the case, what I want you to do is take your bobbin, let it hang, and twist the bobbin and just let it spin counterclockwise. And in doing that, that will change the direction that thread wants to jump. So we've got this tied in, and we're just going to wrap our thread covering that wire back and touching turns until we get back to the hook shank, or hook bend rather. Just like last episode, we're going to dub the body of this fly. And again, when we start with the dubbing, we want to start with very little material. We're just barely putting anything on there, and we're going to roll that with our fingers onto our thread. We can slide that dubbing noodle up right to where the thread meets the hook, and we're going to apply more dubbing for the body, and in this case I like to add a little bit more, make it a little bulkier as I go up or down the thread to create the taper that I want. Again, you can go with a uniform dubbing loop and just wrap over top in areas. Okay, I've probably applied a little more than I want, so I'm just going to pinch off what I don't need. Now we were going to wrap our wire ribbing. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can go counterclockwise, what I would call counterclockwise, or that would be taking it away from your body and wrapping this way. A lot of tires will do that with pheasant tail because they've wrapped the pheasant tail one way and they want to wrap the wire another way. They feel like that makes it a little bit more durable. Quite honestly, I just tie it this way because this is a more comfortable way for me. So I'm just wrapping that wire around the dubbing, leaving a segment in between, a space in between, and you can vary that. The other thing I'm going to show you is if you have the rotary feature of a vise, you can simply hold the wire and turn the fly to create your rib. Alright, so I came over top of that wire. Again, I'm going to show you how I did that. I came over top, left hand, holding the wire with my right hand a couple of times, and then I'm going to tie in front of that wire a couple of times. Now we need to trim the wire. How do we do that? Two ways that I like to use. One is just getting a trash pair of scissors. This is a pair of scissors that I used for a long time, eventually got dull. Quite honestly, I thought I could try and sharpen them myself, did a really poor job, so I can use these on things like wire. The other way is to helicopter that wire, and that's simply taking it and rotating that wire around, and it will break off. So we've got our ribbing in, we've got our tail in, now it's time for our soft hackle. We're going to use Colden Canard feather. This is a rusty spinner color. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this feather and we're going to hold it by the very tip. Opposite, here's the stem, here's the tip. And we're going to bring as many of these fibers backwards towards us as we can without pulling them off the feather. We're just pulling them back. And that creates a small triangle. So we've got a little bit of a triangle up front here that we have to use. That's what we're going to tie in. I'm going to lay this feather on top of the fly, and I'm going to come over and tie in the tip of that triangle, and I'm going to make a couple of wraps behind it and a couple of wraps in front of it to really try and secure that well. So I have a little bit of an excess here, if you can see that. So we'll trim that piece off. And then I'm going to come back again because I really want to make sure I've got that in good. Don't want to create too much bulk, but want to make sure that doesn't slip out. I'm going to introduce a new tool now. This is a hackle plier. If you've got longer feathers, you may not need it, but it sure does come in handy. And what we're going to do, there's a couple of types. One of them rotates. I'm going to take this and clip the stem of the feather. We want to get our feather and we want to try and bring the fibers back towards the back of the fly a little bit. And then we're simply going to come right behind the bead, keeping those fibers back. And we're going to make a couple of turns. The number of turns you make, you don't want this to be too thick, but we do want enough fibers for it to have the correct look. So that's going to be a judgment call based on the particular feather that you're using. Again, when we're securing our material in, we're going to wrap behind it a couple of times and then come in front of the bead or in front of the material a couple of times. Now, in order to cut this off, I want to cut it off, but I don't want to cut off a bunch of the other fibers. So what I'm going to do is take my scissors high and bring it down slowly along the stem and trim that out. So we've got that trimmed up. If there are any excessively long CDC fibers, we can simply try and pinch those off. And then a couple more turns and it's time for our finish knot. Again, this is an area where you can either use the half hitch or we can do a whip finish. And secure that to the back of the bead. That is the fly. Those are our 3 new fundamentals that we've learned. Applying and measuring a tail, ribbing the fly, and adding a soft hackle. That dog will hunt right there. That's a good fly. Put that together and go fish with it. Guaranteed to catch trout. Appreciate you watching. Please tune in to episode 5. We're going to work on a woolly booger next episode. We'll learn how to palmer a feather, and that is a must-have fly for anybody's fly box. If you like this, please say so. If you have any comments, please make them. And subscribe to my channel and visit Big T Fly Fishing for all your fly tying needs. Thanks so much.